Welcome everybody that's rolling in. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, welcome everybody who's rolling in. This is being recorded and it will be available in a few days on CNPS YouTube. And feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, who you are, where you're coming in from, and to use the chat throughout to discuss, talk to each other. There's a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom usually in the room there. And then if you use the Q&A for questions, it's just me tonight, so I will gather those at the end if we have time. But we're going to go ahead and give it just a moment as people are rolling in and then get started. There's also closed captioning is on for those of you who can use that, just to make it a little bit more accessible. We've got people from all over: San Diego, Orinda, Chino, Fresno, Roseville. It's kind of nice seeing the whole diversity of people rolling in. Well, my name's Anne Marie. I'm the Horticulture Programs Manager for CNPS's statewide office, and I base out of a combination of Oakland and a town called Cazadero up in the Russian River Valley. So I'm Northern California, coastal redwoods area. But it's nice to see people calling in from all over. We're going to go ahead and talk tonight about native plants that are edible, how to add them into your garden, how to choose some, how to take care of them, how they fit. And so feel free to use the Q&A to ask questions and the webinar to talk to each other throughout it. It is being recorded, if you didn't hear that part earlier. And we're going to go ahead and get started here. All right. So this first picture, I saw somebody already identifying it in the chat, is rura, for the most part, that I harvested outside of my place in Cazadero. And if you haven't tried it, we'll talk about it more in here. It's worth having. All right. So California is one of the most diverse places on Earth for our plant and our wildlife. It's a huge state as far as states go, but with a lot of diversity in our everything from the oceans to the mountains to the deserts. We have a lot of areas that are still open space. We have a lot of places that are highly urbanized. So adding in some of this diversity to your landscape, no matter how urban you are, helps with biodiversity around the state. And finding ones that are also edible for humans is just kind of an extra joy to have for people who either want to add it into a native plant garden, a low water garden, or into your regular vegetable garden. And I hope this gives a good example of, for when you're making choices in gardens, how important it can be to broader biodiversity when you choose native plants. On the far side with the high green piece, we have oaks, we have that have food properties, we have sages, we have a whole currants in there. And so you can see, compared to other ones that could be chosen, how important it is. This is the representation of the number of Lepidoptera, or butterflies and moths, that are reliant on these different plants. And so some of these plants could be food-bearing plants as well. California plants have been edibles since long before California was colonized. And it has a deep, rich history and particular food histories in all different regions. I'm going to go over kind of broadly today and ones that can be grown in a lot of different areas, and then talk about and give some resources on how to figure out ones that'll probably work for you. Plus, look at these. They're just so beautiful in our gardens as a way to add it in. All right. So native plants that are edible come in a whole variety of different types. You can add into your vegetable gardening native plants that work as greens. And these are a couple of examples with rua, which used to be known as California lettuce or miner's lettuce. We're changing over to the new accepted name of rua, and red maize as well. There's some beautiful plants to have. You can see they've got beautiful flowering. They've got a lot of nutritional value. And if we go through them one by one, rua is a beautiful kind of this big, hefty, leafy green with these delicate little white flowers that are kind of coming out of the center of it. And then that you'll end up with little black seeds. It likes growing it in its native habitat. It's an understory plant. A good growth of understory of rua is an example of having a really good oak woodland or a good redwood forest. Since I live in a redwood forest, it's often part of the understory along with sorrel and other plants in that range. But it can be grown separately and it becomes a beautiful ground cover option. It likes to be a little bit in the shade, though. It prefers a partial shade. And when we talk about how, full sun, partial shade, those actually have numbers that go along with them. A partial shade plant wants 4 to 6 hours of sun. So it's not a full shade. It doesn't have to be fully in direct sun, but it doesn't want to just live in an area where it's baked the whole time. It wants to have that little bit of overhead blocking it and helping it to not get in the full sun. For soil, though, while it can work in a lot of soils, it can work in a lot of versions between easy drainage to higher drainage. It wants to stay wet in the winter. So it wants to, over winter, it wants to have an area that's getting a lot of precipitation, or it wants a little bit of extra irrigation if it's in kind of that setup. They're easy to grow as an understory plant. They're great to have as kind of a lettuce salad alternative, and really easy to harvest if you're in those particular areas. And there's another option, kind of looking through plants that can be ground covers and leafy greens, dark leafy greens. We have red maize. They like a little bit more sun. They like a full sun, which in this case is 6+ hours of direct sun exposure. They like soil that's not acidic, and they want something that's kind of a little bit faster draining. They want something, they're really happy in something that's a little bit of a sandy, loamy mix. They need some wet conditions to get them going, and they want it, particularly when they're germinating, they want a little bit wetter. They want a little bit more sun. They want some easy drainage. So as you're getting them going, if you're putting them into a garden, they're going to want a little bit more irrigation to get them in during the installation period. So red maize are, they're also a good leafy green. They've got a really tasty leaf, a little bit more of a kind of, a little bit more toothy on it. And a couple of options if you're putting in salad type greens, either in a vegetable garden, or if you're adding them into your, just as part of your landscape. If you're adding them in as part of your landscape and you're in an area where some of these can take, they make a nice kind of ground cover in between other plants. And you can have a ground cover in between plants that aren't edible that you can go out and harvest as well. So these can be used in a lot of different ways depending on what your landscape is and whether you want to have them kind of be in a more natural look, or if you want them to be a little bit more stereotypical garden and stay in its particular areas. They make a really nice ground cover though, if you'll let them kind of have their way. Another category that's really easy to grow and to find examples of in California native plants are fruits. And depending on where you're at and what the season looks like there, you may have some of these already growing natural around you. And these are some examples. There are plenty more, but there are native California grapes. There are native huckleberries. There are native strawberries. There are elderberries. And all of them come with different conditions that they naturally grow in. But if you're adding them into your landscape, they can really benefit from the time and materials. So there are grapes that grow throughout California in different versions. I think the one that I had, it does not want to go backwards. There it is. Was a Rogers Red. That's what this is a picture of. And Rogers Reds tend to be a little bit tart for eating, but good for juice, I believe. They're going to want to climb, they want to trellis, they want to grow over something. If you give them something that they're going to want to climb, they're going to be happier. If you don't give them something they're going to want to climb, they don't do as well along the ground, so they're going to want to try and claw their way up something. They like a little bit faster drainage. They like a little bit lower pH in a soil. If you have that, if you know what your soil is, but they can be a really lovely piece to add in. And in strawberries, the wild strawberries are a little bit different than what we're used to seeing at a grocery store or even at the farmer's market, which are ones that have been bred and are a little bit larger. Native strawberries are small. They tend to be a ground cover that wants to really kind of work its way around and under and with other plants. They like places that are a little bit moist often. So they do well with things that have a little bit of clay or with garden type soils. They want a little bit more opportunity to really bask in any precipitation or irrigations. They want a little bit slower drainage, and they'll do pretty well with most sun, but they're often more of like, think of a woodland plant. They want to kind of crawl their way around. And strawberries are one of those plants that if they get going really well, they will really take off. So you want to think about where you want them in your garden, whether you're okay with them kind of working their way around. They bring in a lot of small animals searching for, I don't know what just happened there, or if it just went blank on all of you as well. All right, let's try this again. Okay, there we go. For all the times we do this, sometimes it still feels like it's magic that it's working. Okay, so woodland strawberries. Think about woodland, kind of a woodland version. They can crawl under or around in between some of your other plants. They're one of those ones where when you're going to harvest them, though, you want to make sure you're just as soon as they're ripe, you're getting them harvested. But they are so sweet, and they're so sweet when you're out in nature and find them out there. All right. So a couple examples of things that can be grains. And these are kind of an overview of different types of plants that you can grow to meet all kinds of our dietary interests and needs. Native plants can be grains as well. We have various ones that can be used in different versions. I've got examples here with the honey mesquite and the salt bush. So mesquite is has been a food for as long as humans have found mesquite. They like a full sun. They like fast draining soil. They do really well with DG, kind of decomposing granite, hillsides. Think about where you see mesquite. But those little pods can be made into mesquite flour, which is really tasty and really healthy for you as well. So an option when we don't have as many versions of locally grown flowers or other things that can be used in that way, adding mesquite in is an interesting way to add the concept of having your own flour or grains there. And saltbush can also be used. It's a relative of quinoa. Now, I've read on this more than the others because I haven't tried saltbush, which is one of the ones I have in here that I haven't tried yet. If anybody has any recommendations for it and has had experience with it, please add it into the chat and help everybody to understand what the versions are that are out there. There are leafy greens, there are fruits, there are potential grains, and things like teas that you can do from here as well, that you can add into your garden. And some of these are really common plants to have around. Yarrows, mugwort are all plants that you will find normally in nurseries all over. Mugwort is a plant that has a lot of different beneficial uses. And it's also one that is really easy to make happy and to grow in a lot of areas. It can grow in most sun conditions. It likes a little bit moister soil, but if you're putting it into a garden, you have the opportunity to add it in a bunch of different ways. And I'll talk a little bit later about when people are container gardening. But we have someone with CNPS who has mugwort in container garden in San Francisco. And so mugwort can be a container plant as well. And so even if you don't have as big of a space, you can have this beautiful plant that kind of does the showy growth over a container area. And it makes a great tea. Another option is something like a yarrow. And yarrow makes a great tea. It has a lot of health benefits. I've seen it used in a variety of other ways. There's even a place over in Alameda that does a yarrow saison beer. So it can be used in a variety of other options. And one of the best parts about yarrow is there's pretty much wherever you are in the state, there's probably a yarrow that's going to do really well there. And whatever your garden looks like, whatever your color scheme is for your garden or your house, there's probably a yarrow to go along with that as well. There are yarrows in bright yellows, there are yarrows in reds, there are yarrows in whites. It's a really beautiful plant and it's really hardy. It's a good one if you haven't gone into this realm before. It's a plant that can stand up to a little bit of I call myself a lazy gardener. It can take some a little bit of neglect, but it's a beautiful plant that comes in a whole variety. It can fit a lot of different landscapes, and it can be used in a lot of different ways as within those landscapes beyond its food benefits. And then one of the more fun ones to add in are herbs and spices. I've got a garden area that is in a backyard that's down some stairs and a little ways out. And I found that particularly for things like spices, I wasn't using it as often. And so I put in a urban spice garden right outside the front door with a lot of these plants, the native plants that are edible here. So we've got sages, we've got mints, we've got a wild tarragon that are native to these areas. And they all will, for most of them, there is a version that'll grow where you're at that is adapted to those areas. There are sages that grow in all sorts of different areas, and some of them are really good edibles. They like a lot of sun. I have a typo that I'm just now seeing, so you're probably all seeing it too. They like well-drained soils, but they're also beautiful. They're really good for pollinators. They have a lot of options. They make a good tea. Fried sage leaves in a browned butter sauce or things like that, they make an excellent version of having an addition into all kinds of foods. Mints come in a lot of beautiful versions as well. They can be very container friendly. Being containered might be a good option for them. Mint is one of the other ones that can be a little weedy if it's not where you want it to be. It can, not that it's a bad plant, but that it can spread very easily. Mint leaves will show up under plants all over that you weren't anticipating, which means they're actually not terrible as a ground cover. If that's what you want them to do, they will take off and they will take over. Your neighbors may not be as thrilled. You may want to check in with them on that part, but having your own mints outside, we're in the middle of the hot dog days of summer right here, and they are fabulous in some water. They're fabulous in a cocktail. Having mints right outside your door as part of your garden, they're an easy edible. They like being in a garden. They thrive in these conditions. So might be, if you're just starting into this, it might be a really easy one to add in. And then there are some other versions of plants that fit all kinds of other pieces. We have red-skinned onions, which have this beautiful flower on the bottom photo there that add in all kinds of lovely ways to a garden as well. And then things like the prickly pears and this beautiful tuna, the red fruiting body on it, tunas. You can, with the tunas, I grew up in the Southwest and I spent a lot of my career in northern Arizona as well. And we would go out and harvest the red tunas and make them into syrups or into jellies or into other things too. So I've categorized them in a lot of the basic ways we use plants in a vegetable garden, but there are a lot of other plants that are structural or beautiful in different ways in your landscape that can give you these same food benefits as well as the biodiversity benefits. The prickly pears also can give you, I believe you can do Nepalus out of them. So regardless of where you are, there are these native plants that can go into your garden too. Right. So there are all kinds of lists. And at the end, I'm going to go out of the presentation and show you where you can find a bunch of different lists and how you can come up with some of a list that works for where you live and where you can find the plants and where you can buy the different ones that work for your area. So when you're going to add native plants that are edible into your garden, if you're going to mix them in with your normal landscape, there are a couple of factors to take into consideration, and they're similar to the factors that you'd take into consideration if you're replacing or adding a plant in a landscape anyways. If you've come into a landscape that's already partially developed, you're redoing parts, or you're taking out a plant, or you just want to start adding in natives, start with your current plant list. If you have a current garden that you are going to be mixing things into, take a look at your current plant list and then really drill down. If you don't have a plant list on your landscape, it's a fun thing to do, by the way. You can take the plants that are in your landscape, you can put them into a list in CalScape, and it will give you all kinds of information about them, about what they're doing, about what they should be doing, about when to do maintenance on them. So you start with your current plant list, you take it into CalScape, or you can take it into WoolCalls if you want to know more about its water usage, particularly the water usage of different plants in your area. They're both good resources for looking at plant lists. And also draw out your landscape. If you're going to be adding in, big sections, or if you're going to be replacing plants, it's nice to have a current kind of as-built version of your landscape. And it doesn't have to be this beautifully done, or it doesn't have to be that fancy. You can literally take a piece of paper, map it out, grid it, and just kind of put, here is a, this circle is a tree, these little X's are, various plants, but having a concept of where it is, what's in there, and then using that drawing to figure out and track where's your sun. When, how much, where does your sun track, and how does that move over time? How much sun do you get in your landscape due to the buildings around it, the trees over it, if you're getting shadows off of a hillside, if you're getting shadows off of neighbors. Take a look at your soil around the different parts of your landscape. If you have more than one planting area, you may want to take a look at all the different places that are soil. Do something as simple as kind of a rope test or a ribbon test, where you get it wet and you put it in your hands and you kind of feel out what type of soils you have, and figure out what soils you have and kind of their composition, their drainage in different parts of your landscape. We often will take a look at a spot, but if you're in a bigger landscape, you'll want to take a look at a couple of different spots into your landscape. And if you have any questions about your landscape, you may also want to send off and get your soil tested. There are soil testing laboratories that do specific testing for landscapes, and you can even request that they give you an analysis and ask that if they're going to do any suggestions for add-ins, that they make those add-ins organic. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to go that far. And I know that adding materials into a native plant garden isn't something people always are anticipating doing. And that kind of depends on where you're at. If you're in a native soils, if you're in the soils of that area, if they're in their original watershed, you probably don't need to do much of that if you're going to have plants that are from that region. But if you're in a city that has been developed and redeveloped for decades or a century, you may have soils that are questionable, degraded in some way. They may have heavy metal in them or various other things, or they may just not have a lot of soil life, in which case you're going to want to take a look at that and maybe feed the soil. So you're feeding the soil web. But as you're drawing this out, if you're testing your soil, you want to look at for what type it is. If you have different types, you want to draw that out on your landscape map also. Be like, this area is very clayish, so you'll know that you want more clay-friendly plants that deal really well with having their feet wet for longer. You may want to note the factors of wind, particularly if you're in an area where you get a lot of wind. You'll want to note which direction it comes, how it's going to interact. And then you want to note the direction of any runoff, any precipitation. How does it flow over your landscape? Are you seeing any erosion issues? It's kind of just a nice drawing to have, and to have that list. And then as you're adding in plants, you're looking to put them with similar factors. You're looking to put them with similar irrigation. So you're looking, where is your current if you're using irrigation, where is your current irrigation? Are your plants hydrozoned, which hopefully they are. So there are areas that are low water use, medium water use. Maybe you have an area like a vegetable garden that is a higher water use area, and you want to put similar water needs plants. You want them to group together. So if you're installing a garden, or if you're working these plants into a current landscape, you don't want to put them into an area that doesn't give them the right type of irrigation. If you're adding in a low water needs plant, you're going to drown it if you put it into a high water needs area. So you want to take a look at what your landscape is as you've drawn it out. Where is your irrigation, and what plants that are in there have similar water needs? And then you want to take a look at the sun needs. You know, some plants don't do as well with being drowned if there's a lot of runoff going over your landscape. Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, have certain sun needs, like if they're a high sun need and they need over 6 hours, you don't want to put them next to the house that's going to block their shadow, or you don't want to put them in a place that is constantly under a tree. So you're trying to weave them into your landscape with plants that like the same things. It's a little bit like, you know, trying to get your kids into clubs that they want to, that have kids wanting to do the same types of pieces. You don't want to put them in with soccer if everybody that they've ever played with wants to do dance, kind of thing. You want to give them the same type of setting that they'll thrive in. And then you can also take a look at putting them into containers. And a lot of these plants will do well in containers. And if you don't have as much space, if you're on a patio landscape, if you've got if you're doing them in a window, if you've got a little balcony, you can still do these kinds of plants in container gardens. And some of them do really, really well in containers. You want to put them in a container where you can move it around and get them the light that they need. But containers give you the option to find the place that makes them happy. So, and you want to put them in, you're going to be putting them in planting soil of some kind. So you want a mix of soil that will help them to thrive. You want soil that has additional biological materials in it. You want to make sure that you're feeding those materials, because they're probably not going to be getting the same leaf drop or things like that that they would get in a landscape. You want to make sure that they're getting decent water, because they're not going to be on, they may not be. For most of us, our container plants aren't on the same setup as of irrigation as a landscape would be, or a vegetable garden. So you're going to want to remind yourself, set up a watering schedule, or set it up so that they are added into some version of irrigation, because they dry out quicker. They're a little more exposed. They don't have the same kind of things buffering around them. But a lot of these plants can do really well as container plants. The strawberries can do really well as container plants. Yarrow does really well as a container plant. Mints are great as a container plant if you don't want them to get free and take over your landscape. Or if your neighbors don't want them to get free and take over their landscape as well. So you could have even your own setup of you can have a whole berries version set up. You can change them out for seasons. A container garden gives you an opportunity, if you don't have the space, or if you want to do different groupings. A lot of these do really well. So some tips and tricks, particularly if you're in container pieces. Mints spread easily, as I've mentioned a couple times. They do really well in a container. If you want them out of a container, though, Yerba Buena will give you a mint type that doesn't take over quite as easy, and it's beautiful. It's a really, really beautiful plant to have in your garden. Elderberries, they can grow really large, some of the types, in a planted garden, but they can also do really well in a container setup. Like the strawberries, thimbleberries can do really well in a container setup also. I don't know if you've tried thimbleberries, but they're like if a strawberry and a raspberry had an even better baby. They are so good. And they're such a prize to find if you're out in the wild, that I've been growing them on purpose for a while, and they are amazing. They're easily one of the joys of summer. And then a couple of tips for one of the big ones is that if you have oak trees, oaks are excellent for many things, including as a food source. They are excellent for biodiversity needs. California used to have huge oak woodlands, and we have so much fewer than we used to have. But if you have oaks, they don't like summer water. And that includes, they don't want you planting things under them that want summer water. So as you're thinking about these and I can see a beautiful tableau in my head where an oak would have strawberries under it and various things like that. They don't want that during the summer, but they do really well with things like rura under them that want to be wet during the winter. And having a couple of oak trees and having something like rura under them is a sign of a really good oak woodland. So it's a great combination, but you can't put in things that are going to be high needs summer plants or ones that you want to water during summer for the aesthetic value. So I'm going to pop out of the slide deck right here and look at a couple of resources that are really good for depending on where you are in different parts of the state, because California has so many different areas. We have people on here in Southern California and Northern California, down at the beach, up in the mountains, deep in cities. And while a lot of these plants can work for a lot of those areas, they're not, there are ones that are specific to where you're at, ones that will do better, or ones that are easier to find, depending on where you're at. And there are some great resources. So I'm going to escape out of this and go over, and I want to talk about finding some of these first in CalScape and then in some of the other pieces. If you haven't seen the new CalScape, it is a beautiful space. You can go in, you can find plants by searching for ones up here at the looking glass piece. You can find them over here with searching native plants. And you can go in and find in your list, in my list, there are a couple versions of edible native plants. And if you Google CalScape edible native plants, a couple of different versions will come up. So I want you to have an opportunity to look and see that various people have put these together. You can't work within them, but they will give you kind of inspiration to take a look at what will grow in your area. But we have on this list wild tarragon and early onions, red-skinned onions. Somebody's got a lot of onions and aromatics here. Sedges and gourds, mints and berries. So this list has a whole lot of different options in this way. But to give you an example of a couple of other lists, here is another one of edible plants that includes showy milkweeds, ceanothus. Look at this red berry. So people have different versions, and you'll want to take a look through them and just figure out which ones are right for your area, or start doing your own list and adding it in. Here's one just called edible that has wild gingers, service berries, mesquite. And then there are a couple of other really good options for figuring out ones that are right near you. Tree of Life Nursery. If you haven't been there, it is a delightful place to go and spend some time. It is finding your local nursery that you love is one of the greatest resources you can have in native plants, in figuring out what works for you, in asking why something isn't working quite right, what should you do with it, what should you grow with it, all the various things. But then there are some epic nurseries that are worth field trips to, and Tree of Life is kind of a field trip nursery as well. If you're in the area, if you live in their area or traveling in that area, it's a beautiful space that they've curated, and they do some great pieces, but they also have classes fairly regularly on California native edibles, and they have a whole list, particularly ones that are going to work for that region, for that kind of hot, dry, grass hills where they're at. Big leaf maple, wild onions, quail bush, western redbud, blue flax, prickly pear, which is, I've gone over as one of my favorites for all these. lemonberry sugar bush, golden currants. So they have a whole list here. They have recipe downloads. They have videos that they've done. They're really good and they're really knowledgeable about what they do. I'll add these into the email that goes out afterwards so that you can see kind of resource lists, but it's worth taking a look, reading through what they have, and watching the video that they've done. They also do classes, I think, on a fairly regular basis on this and on other things. And another incredible nursery that has amazing lists, if you haven't found them, is Las Politas. They're kind of Central Coast area, so different type of habitat in that region, but they have this incredible list of edibles and where they're found and links to what they are. We've got, again, the maple, we've got buckeyes, wild onions, ragweed, service berries. They've got a very long, intensive list that you can go through and find all kinds of different pieces with it. They have how to use it. The bulb is edible, raw or cooked, the seeds roasted and eaten. They give you direction on them. There are links with each of them to the plant, so you can go in and find out more about the plant in their nursery. And then they also, because they do all their things in this table format, they're really nice to copy out if you want to start copying them into a piece where you're going to keep a list for your place. So it's also easy with, clicked on the list there, taking a look at what that looks like. On these types of lists, if you're in any of the Cowscape lists, it's possible also to go into any particular plant and figure out what nurseries are carrying them. This onion is carried mostly down in Southern California. You're going to find it at Tree of Life, which makes a lot of sense, and at the CNPS San Diego, their seed and bulb sales. Or you can go in to figure out, let's try thimbleberries here, which I was raving about. Thimbleberries are carried by at least 27 nurseries. You can figure out where you're at, kind of zoom into the nurseries in those areas. You can take a look at what they have in stock. You can go to the nursery itself and take a look at the plant lists that they have and what they have on Cowscape, or you can directly connect to the nursery itself, like this one leads to Las Politas. So if you fall in love with different versions of this, it's a way to connect, figure out what nurseries are near you, who has the plants, who has seeds of these different kinds, and also work through them. So I'm going to go back just to our last piece here of the slides, and then we'll get into questions for a couple of minutes. So before we get into questions, I think my last slide here is just that next month, we're going to be talking about integrated pest management. And integrated pest management's a little beyond good bug, bad bug. It's really looking at what are the underlying sources of what's going wrong and how do we put the landscape back in balance in a way that will help it to take care of itself. Or how do we intervene in a way that will stop that practice right then? Some things, it's a matter of taking care of them in particular ways. Sometimes you have something invading and you need to, bring in help, a deer cage, that type of thing for help. So this will be going a little bit deeper on that. And the people speaking on it are really good at this. So if you're having any problems, if you have any concerns, or if you just want to learn how to help prevent having problems in your landscape, I would suggest listening in next month. All right, I'm going to pop out of here and start reading through the Q&A and trying to make sure that we either have an answer or we can help find the resources for that. And hopefully, I see the chat is still got people active in it. Hopefully people are giving resources there as well. Okay. So we are going to escape out of that part and take a look at, let's see, got a variety of these. Do sages like summer water to keep them looking fresh? They do, or they can. They'll survive depending on where you are and if they're the type you have works well in your area. Like every good question, the real answer is it depends. But if it's a type of plant growing in your area, they'll probably be fine with the normal precipitation pattern. If you want them to look fresh and a particular aesthetic throughout the year, some summer water, not a lot, but a couple times a month, giving them a little bit of water will help keep them looking a little bit fresher. And particularly if you're in something like an HOA or a place where it really does matter to your neighbor, then you're going to want to give them a little water and have them kind of be a little bit, a little happier. Nutrition info for native plants. I don't know where we can find nutrition info for native plants off the top of my head. I'm going to try and keep that in our questions here and figure that out and see if we can find a link to put into the follow-up email for this. I'll add in the different lists and the places that we found them, and then I'll try and add in these last pieces as well. Okay, so we'll look for nutrition information for native plants, native edible plants. Will Rogers Red hybridize with nearby Zinfandel? Got one, someone has one in a tub near some Zen. The Zen this year tasted like Zen, but then the Rogers seemed to bloom at a different time. Rogers is a nativar, I believe. The Rogers Red is a nativar. So it's a version of a cultivar. I don't know if it will hybridize, but I do know somebody that might have that answer. And we'll reach out to them and figure that out. To be open about it, I think the ones I've known that work with them a lot are up at Cal Flora Nursery. So I'm probably going to reach out to them. And if they're on here, hi, they can just, I'll see if I can figure that out and get some information on that. Are native buckwheats edible? What's the best time to get ripe seeds? They've tried looking at them, but theirs don't seem to set seed, or at least they don't broadcast it. My understanding is native buckwheats are edible. I have not eaten them. So we'll go ahead and look for that as well. How do you bush out leggy Cleveland sages? If you have a sage or a lot of other plants that are, you've got long, thin pieces and you're trying to get them a little bit fuller, when they're starting to come out in spring, you want to just pinch off the tips that are growing high and let them put a little bit more energy into growing a little bit fuller. It will help them to kind of not just take off and grow up and put all their energy into that up piece. Give them a chance to, in the spring, by pinching them to grow a little bit broader. See. Do we know of a place that sells a subspecies or variety of coyote mint that is native to the Bologna wetland areas? I'm not sure which piece would be native to that area, but I will take a look and try and find that also. There are ones that will do well in that kind of wetland habitat, but if you're looking for one that's native to that area, I'll need to take a look and see what I can find on that. That might be a restoration grower that would sell something like that as well. Let's see. What part of the yarrow plant is used for tea or medicinally? And so on all of these, one of the easy ones to do is I brought up and hopefully you're seeing the Las Politas piece here. I believe. Nope, it won't let me look for it while I am presenting. But it's a great resource because in each of these, they'll tell you which version of what you can use, and how to use it. Let's see. Oh, they're sorted by. Sorry for the scrolling. I know it can be a little bit annoying and a little dizzying to watch from the outside there. Hoping to grab yarrow and have it talk about the plant a little bit more. I'll put the link in for that as well. Let's see. Oh, gonna answer. California buckwheat seeds can be winnowed from the dry flowers and ground into buckwheat flour. Nice. Feels like a superpower to be able to make flour out of the plants that we grow. All right. And then were there any other questions in the questions are, Janet, are in Q&A. All right. I think that's the questions that I have right now. And we're going to get done just a couple minutes early. I will find the answer to some of the questions there. And those will be sent along with a link to the recording on this and to a bunch of other resources. And then next month, we will be working on integrated pest management. All right. Well, we'll see you all next month, hopefully, and you'll receive an email with the follow-up pieces in the next couple of days. Hopefully this, makes it is an entryway to adding in edible plants into your native landscape. Thanks. Bye.